Hello, I'm Dr. Dennis Hartlieb with Dental Online Training, and welcome to our video series, Product Reviews and Clinical Tips for the Restorative Dentist. Today, I'm here to talk about a new polishing system from Brasseler through the Koi Center that I think is just a really interesting way to manage polishing all materials in your practice. Very simplified and very efficiently. Well, through the Koi Center, through John Kois and Brasseler, they've introduced a system that is perfect whether you're polishing composite restorations, anterior, posterior, or porcelain restorations, regardless of the material. So it could be zirconia, could be lithium disilicate, could be feldspathic porcelain. What I really love about this universal polishing system from Brasseler is that it really sets it up so that regardless of the material you're polishing, you have everything that you need, making it so much easier in your restorative practice. So let's take a look. If you take a look at the left of the bird block, you can see this featherlight wheel, this pink featherlight wheel, which is their ceramic medium polisher, so almost like their pre-polisher. You see the 14 millimeter featherlight wheel, and then interestingly, they have this little featherlight cup. And I want to talk about that. I'm going to demonstrate how we use that here on a model in just a minute. After you go through and do the pre-polishing with the medium, the pink, then you go to the middle wheel or the middle cup, which is the fine polisher. And again, this is good for any of your ceramics, whether you're doing a zirconia restoration, lithium disilicate, or feldspathic porcelain. And of course, it has a featherlight cup and to complement what you have for the medium polisher. What's great about this is they also give you recommendations for your speed. So this is a slow speed handpiece, and you should run the medium pink around 6,000 RPM. You're going to slow it down a little bit when you're using the fine polisher, somewhere around 4,000, 5,000 RPM. Now, that's the porcelain polishers. With the composite polishers, again, same thing. We have a pre-polisher, which is this green wheel. Again, another 14 millimeter featherlight wheel. And then we have the corresponding featherlight cup. And again, I'll show you how to use this with your composites, and this is going to sort of be our pre-polisher. I will tell you with these polishers, we'll talk about them when we use them. You have to be pretty careful. We're going to run these around 5,000 to 6,000 RPMs with sort of light to moderate pressure. You have to be careful because these can take away a bit of composite in a hurry. So we want to make sure that we don't change the contour of our restorations when we're using these medium polishers with the featherlights. Now we're going to use the same final polishers, the gray polisher, for our composites. So how simplified is that? Is that just perfect or what? So I'll use the 14 millimeter featherlight wheel to polish, or I'll use that featherlight cup. Let's start out with some composite restorations polishing. These polishers, I'm going to be doing both an anterior composite, a veneer that I created, and a posterior composite, an occlusal composite, and we're going to be using the featherlight cup for that. Okay, let's show how we do that. On this model, I've placed a occlusal composite. The outline runs sort of like right around through here. In the mouth, my first thing that I would use to adjust a posterior occlusal composite or posterior composite would be a carbide football shaped burr. So I use like an OS1 burr, and I would go in and I would adjust the occlusion. So that's what I did already on this, just like I would do in the mouth. Now, following that, then I would go to, say, my rubber cups or my rubber points to start polishing, though my preference is always using cups rather than points when I'm polishing those posteriors. I'll show you how I do that. I'm going to start out with the medium coarse, the green featherlight cup. So again, I'd have my assistant be spraying water. I'm going to run my featherlight from the composite onto the tooth, running around 5,000 to 6,000 RPM. First, I'll start out on the palatal inclines, on the buccal cusps, and then I'll go to the buccal inclines on the palatal cusps. The fingers of the featherlights are going to just sort of flex into the anatomy. When I finish with the coarse polishers or the medium coarse polishers, I want to have a matte finish. I'm not going to have a gloss. I'm not going to have any shine, but it should be smooth and free of defects. So let's dry it off and take a look. All right, that's pretty good. I love how that's just sort of flexing into the anatomy, but being careful not to lose the anatomy. All right, after I've finished with the medium, then I can go to the fine feather cup, which is the gray. You can start to see the gloss start to pop up as we've gone through using this fine featherlight cup. Now, what's interesting with these featherlights is that they're made out of a polyurethane. A lot of polishers are made out of silicone, which allows them to be more flexible. But it's this featherlight design that allows these polyurethane wheels and cups to be more flexible. So if they don't have these sort of separations, like these little finger-like projections, they'd be too stiff. But because they have these projections, then you can get that flex and allow it to follow into the anatomy that I created with the composite buildup. All right, let me clean that off with a little alcohol gauze. We'll dry it and we'll see how that looks. All right, we'll take a look. I think that's a pretty nice shine and super efficient. Yeah, I'm real pleased. I'm really digging that featherlight design for those posterior composites. I think it's going to be also nice when I'm working with like a class 2 composite and I have to polish that proximal wall as it goes from the proximal contact or the proximal restoration into the tooth structure. There's always that little bit of flash of material that we want to first use like a diamond burr to blend in, but then I want to polish that. So I think these are going to be really interesting working for the posteriors. So far, I love them. Let's check them for an anterior composite, but for the posterior composite, those featherlight cups, I think they're great. Let's take a look for the anterior composite now. Okay, with the anterior composite, this is a composite veneer that I just quickly placed, just a single layer of material over the central incisor. It's a little bit long, so we'll have to adjust that. I want to see how the medium coarse featherlight does for adjusting that length. In the mouth, I would use an carbide trimming burr, like an ET9 burr. That's what I use for the initial contour on this. I would typically use disc in the mouth to do my final polish on a veneer, but I want to see how these work with the featherlights. So again, we're going to start out with our composite polishers, which is great that they label it. It's hard to mistake it. So this is my green. This is the medium. I'm going to start out with the featherlight wheel. I'm going to first start out adjusting the length with the featherlight wheel just to see how the aggressiveness is. I'm going to run this around 6,000, maybe a little bit higher. You can see that works pretty darn quick. All right, so for getting the length, I would typically use a disc. I think it's probably a little more efficient with a coarse disc, but it definitely works using this medium coarse featherlight. Now, the surface is fairly smooth because I used a carbide trimming burr. I know a lot of people like to use diamond burrs for their contouring. I prefer a carbide burr, which gives me this pretty smooth surface. So I don't have to do a lot of contouring. I'm going to run the featherlight around 5,000 RPM. Be careful because I think these are fairly aggressive with your composite, and you don't, if you want to add anatomy, some lobes, I think this will work. That's what I'm going to find out. So let's take a look. All right, looking at the facial contour, I want to add a little facial lobe right in through this to create a mesiofacial lobe, create a distal facial lobe. Even though we don't really have that anatomy much on the adjacent plastic tooth, let's see if we can create a little bit of lobe effect. Creating again, distal facial depression and the mesiofacial depression using this pendulating motion. And it's relatively aggressive, so I think with this polisher, I want to run it around 4,000 to 5,000. Be careful unless you're doing some gross reduction, or run it over the surface just to make sure that we are defect free. All right, so that's using the featherlight wheel, and I think that we have actually a pretty nice surface. Nice and smooth, matte finish, not really getting our gloss on yet, just getting a little bit of a gloss, but we should be able to get a higher gloss using the fine featherlight wheel. Now, the question is, around the cervical margin on this veneer, or like a class 5, how do the featherlight cups work? That's what I want to find out. So I'm going to be using the featherlight cup. What concerns me about working around the cervical margin is that these are fairly flat, the tip of the featherlights. And I wonder if they would get in cervically and into the interproximal. So that's what we want to look at as we're going through here. Will it flex? Not so bad. I think that's pretty good. Let me clean that off and we'll take a look. I typically like a silicone cup because that will flex more and flex underneath the soft tissue. Might not be too bad if I can be able to retract the tissue so I can get that cup to be able to get around that margin and make sure it's nice and smooth. So far, so good. Looks very smooth. I'm not seeing any streaks that are caused by the cup. It looks very smooth on the surface. From here, then, we're going to go to the final polish. I'll start along the cervical using the gray featherlight cup. This is the fine polisher. Same motion, I would be retracting with an instrument along the gum line. My assistant would be dribbling some water to keep the tooth cool. And I think you have to run that around 5,000 RPM to start picking up that polish. 4,000 to 5,000, definitely no slower than that. Around 4,000 to 5,000, I think, is when that gloss starts to come out. Then we come in with our featherlight wheel. This is the gray wheel. And then we're going to run this again around 4,000 to 5,000 RPM with medium to moderate pressure I'm using over the composite. It's got a pretty good shine. That's got a pretty good gloss. Not so bad. So this is something I would typically be using my polishing disc to use. I still think there's a place for polishing disc for working on those embrasures. I don't think you can use these featherlight cups or wheels to open up the facial embrasures, to open up the incisal embrasures, even the gingival embrasures. I think there's still a place for the disc, but these are pretty efficient, and I think you get a pretty decent polish. Both the restorations that we polished were nano-filled composites. So the posterior composite and this veneer are both nano-filled composite materials. I think that's pretty darn good. So overall, for the composite restorations, I've been really pleased with this. I think the featherlight cups for the posterior composites, fantastic. Love them. For the facials, very impressed. I'm curious to see how the featherlight cup will work on a natural tooth. If I'm doing a class 5, if I'm doing a full veneer, will it flex underneath the soft tissue, or as I retract the soft tissue, can I get enough flex so I can really get that margin smooth? Is there still an advantage with a silicone cup that has more flexibility than these polyurethane featherlights? I'm not sure, but they're pretty darn decent. And I will tell you, the featherlight wheel, fantastic. Great gloss, at least on this nanofill composite. Still need some disc, I think, to start working the embrasures, open up the facial embrasures, the incisal embrasures. But overall, very, very impressed with the composite polishing portion of the system. Okay, I hope this tip was helpful for you as we reviewed this new universal polishing system from Brasseler. Using these featherlight wheels and featherlight cups to polish our composite restorations, you can see what an outstanding job that they did. Now, if you enjoyed this tip and you want to see more on this, then look forward to our next mini tip where we're going to look at the same system, but we're going to be looking at porcelain polishing. Using, again, the featherlight system for polishing porcelain. Also, if you like this technique and you'd like to get more tips and more resources on your restorative dentistry, check us out at Dental Online Training, and that's dothandson.com. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this video and look forward to seeing you at our next tip. Until then, as always, yours for better dentistry. I'm Dr. Dennis Hartlieb.